The new Solomon Islands Prime Minister has made his first trip to Australia since his election last month, meeting Anthony Albanese for talks in Canberra this week. For more on this trip, I'm joined by Clive Moore, who's an Emeritus Professor at the University of Queensland and an expert on the Solomons. Professor, thank you for joining me. How significant was this trip and why?
Well, it's not unusual for Solomon Island Prime Ministers to come to Australia and get 21 gun salutes. It's happened many times, but the timing of this is interesting because he's chosen Australia as his first overseas trip since he became Prime Minister. He won't go to China until he's up that way anyway in July, so that he's given precedence to coming to talk to Australia. And I think Australia wants a better relationship with the Solomons, and the Solomons government certainly wants that with Australia. So the stress has been on the long-term relationship, and the big ask has been, please help us with the policing, which is sensible.
Australia has had a somewhat complicated relationship with the Solomons in recent years. There was concern that it was moving closer to China under its previous leader, Manele Sogavare. Do you think things will be any different under Jeremiah Manele?
Probably more diplomacy and less fireworks than with Sogavare. But you've got to remember that Jeremiah was the foreign minister who negotiated the new relationship with China. So it's not as if he's just wandered into this. He was foreign minister from 2019. So he was the person who, for Sogavare, was the overseer of the new relationship with China. So that there will be changes, but it'll really be a change more in the personality of the leader. He's made it quite clear that he intends to continue the relationship with China, but he also says, well, our relationship with Australia is just as important to us. So, and don't forget that Sogavare is the finance minister, so he's not very far away. But you know, he is one of the main orchestrators of this new relationship.
And as you mentioned, the Solomons PM has asked Australia to help expand his country's police force to 3,000 officers. So how would that work, and is that something that would be in Australia's interests too?
It's a very good idea, and it's nothing new because Australia has had a close policing relationship with the Solomon Islands really since 2003. There was a period that we call the tension in the Solomon Islands, which was a period of civil unrest, and Australia plus all of the Pacific nations came in to help the Solomons at that time, and that lasted through from 2003 to 2017. Australian advisors have remained in the police force. It's not as if there are no Australians, they're not on the ground walking around, but there are Australian advisors who have always been there. So it's a long-term relationship now for more than 2 decades. And it seems to me that the most, if we are worried about a defence pact with China, and that the defence pact could be used in various ways, it could also be used if there was civil unrest in the Solomons. There's likely to be civil unrest again. And there are long-term problems there. And Sogavare and Manele were right, in a sense, to try to look at how they can stop that happening. In Honiara in particular, on 2 occasions recently, large amounts of the city were burned. That's not the sort of thing you want in your capital city. So they've been thinking long and hard about this. And the relationship with Taiwan was fading. If you look at Pacific nations, I think there's 11 who recognise mainland China, only 3 now who recognise Taiwan. So Taiwan is a spent force and never had the financial clout that mainland China does to follow through with promises. So that you have Australia desperately interested in its relationship with its neighbour in the Solomons and has a long investment in the Solomon Islands. China has, whether we like it or not, a Pacific policy, and that includes corporate imperialism plus a much more extended relationship with the South Pacific nations. And America is interested, but really America had no full diplomatic representation in the Solomon Islands. It ran the Solomon Islands out of Papua New Guinea for the last 20 years. So I'm yet to see anything substantial come from the United States. So the China relationship was coming quite naturally in the Pacific to many Pacific nations. And the Security Pact, we don't really know what's in the Security Pact between the Solomons and China. We've seen a draft, but we've never seen the final one. Increasing the strength of policing means that internally, at least, it's most unlikely that the Security Pact would ever be brought into use. There are no Chinese bases in the Solomon Islands. In 2022, when the pact was signed, everyone was looking for Chinese bases and where they would be situated. In fact, I did it myself in an article. Where on earth could you put a Chinese base? It hasn't happened. And there's no particular reason, just because it's in a pact, that it will. But increasing the size of the police force is an excellent idea.
There was great concern on the Australian side when the Solomons struck that security deal with China. That was back in 2022. Do you think a policing deal with Australia could ever operate alongside a security deal with China?
We had yet to see that the terms of the security treaty will ever be activated. And the policing is domestic. The Security Pact could be domestic, but I think the real fear of places like Australia is that it would be used internationally. And remember, this all blew up at the time of the Australian election in 2022. And there were a lot of politicians making capital out of fear of China and also fear of a base in the Solomon Islands. And a lot of media people supported that, and they're quite ignorant of the nature of Solomon Islands people and the Solomon Islands government. So it blew out of all proportions. And it seems to me that if the question is, can we have a Chinese security pact and can we have Australia helping with the police? Yes, we can. And remember that the Chinese are also helping as advisors in the police force. I've always been more puzzled about how you can operate with two such diverse advisory groups. The Chinese way of, how should we put it, policing is rather different from the way that Australia would advise to deal with policing. And it seems to me that having the real problem is the Chinese advising in the police. It would be better if the Chinese advice was in terms of the security pact, which may never come to anything, and that Australia invested heavily in the police. The Solomons needs a better police force. It's something that we are good at. We have been involved for 20 years, and there's no reason why we shouldn't develop our relationship with the Solomon Islands by putting stress on building up the police force.